The cold wind whistled through the empty streets of Cedar Ridge, a forgotten town in the Colorado Territory, as Bethany Lawrence stumbled forward, her legs barely supporting her weakened frame. It was 1876, a harsh winter that had stolen what little she had left after fleeing from a situation that threatened not just her livelihood, but her very life. Her stomach clenched painfully, a gnawing emptiness that had been her constant companion for 3 days. The meager savings she'd managed to bring had been stolen when she dozed off on the stagecoach, leaving her with nothing but the clothes on her back and a small locket containing a faded photograph of her parents. The boarding house had turned her away without payment, and pride had kept her from begging until now, when hunger had overwhelmed any remaining dignity. Bethany paused, leaning against the rough wooden post of a saloon porch. The establishment was closed at this midnight hour, like most of the town. Only one building still showed signs of life, a small ranch house at the edge of town, lights spilling from its windows like a beacon in the darkness. She hadn't eaten in days, and the weakness was making her vision blur. Her hands shook violently as she pushed herself away from the post, determined to reach that light before she collapsed completely. Each step was torture, her thin boots offering little protection against the freezing ground. The journey to the lit house seemed endless. When she finally reached the porch, Bethany could barely lift her hand to knock. Instead, she stumbled, her body hitting the door with a thud before she slid down to sit on the wooden planks, shivering uncontrollably. The door swung open, revealing a tall figure silhouetted against the warm light inside. "What in tarnation?" a deep voice exclaimed. The man crouched down, and Bethany looked up into concerned blue eyes set in a weathered face. He was perhaps 30, with sandy brown hair and a neatly trimmed beard. "Miss, are you hurt?" "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I haven't eaten in days." The man's expression softened immediately. "Coming out of this cold," he said, gently helping her to her feet. "I'm Jacob Porter." "Bethany Lawrence," she managed as he guided her inside. The warmth of the house enveloped her immediately, making her realize just how cold she had been. The main room was simple but comfortable, with a crackling fire in the stone hearth and a table set with a single plate, as if Jacob had just been about to eat. "You're shaking," he observed, his voice gentle as he helped her to a chair by the fire. "How long have you been out there?" "Hours," Bethany admitted, trying to control the trembling of her limbs. "I arrived on the afternoon stage, but I had no money for lodging." Jacob frowned, moving to the stove where a pot bubbled. "Come eat at my table," he said, ladling what smelled like beef stew into a bowl. "I was just about to have my own supper. Late night checking on a new foal." The smell of the food made Bethany's stomach clench painfully. When Jacob placed the bowl before her, along with a chunk of crusty bread, she had to fight the urge to grab it and devour it like an animal. "Slow now," Jacob cautioned, seeming to read her thoughts. "Your stomach won't take kindly to rushing after going empty." Bethany nodded, forcing herself to take small, careful spoonfuls. The stew was simple but delicious, rich with vegetables and tender beef. Each bite seemed to restore a bit of her strength, the warmth spreading through her body. Jacob sat across from her with his own bowl, studying her with curious but kind eyes. "Where are you coming from, Miss Lawrence?" "Denver," she replied after swallowing. "And please, call me Bethany." "Denver's a fair piece from here," Jacob commented. "What brings you to Cedar Ridge?" Bethany hesitated, uncertain how much to reveal to this stranger. But something in his honest face made her want to trust him. "I needed to leave quickly. My employer." He became inappropriate in his attentions. Jacob's expression darkened. "I understand. No need to explain further." He broke off a piece of bread and passed it to her. "Cedar Ridge is small, but decent folk mostly. You'll be safe here." "I had planned to find work," Bethany explained, "but my money was stolen on the journey. I have nothing now." Jacob considered this information as he ate. Mrs. Miller at the general store was looking for help, and the schoolhouse needs a teacher come spring. He glanced at her hands, which had stopped shaking now that she had eaten. "You have the look of education about you." "I was a governess in Denver," Bethany admitted. "Before that, I taught in a small school in Missouri." Jacob nodded, seeming pleased. Cedar Ridge could use someone with learning. Too many children growing up knowing only how to brand cattle and mend fences. As she finished the meal, exhaustion began to overtake Bethany. The warmth, the food, and the release of tension made her eyelids heavy. "You need rest," Jacob observed, standing and clearing the dishes. "I have a small room my sister uses when she visits from Pueblo. You can sleep there tonight, and tomorrow we'll figure out something more permanent." "I couldn't impose," Bethany protested weakly, though the thought of a Real bed nearly brought tears to her eyes. "It's no imposition," Jacob insisted. "Can't very well send you back into the cold, can I? What kind of man would that make me?" He showed her to a small but clean room with a narrow bed covered in a colorful quilt. "There's water in the pitcher if you want to wash up. Sleep as long as you need." "Thank you, Mr. Porter," Bethany said, emotion thickening her voice. "I don't know how I'll repay this kindness." "Jacob," he corrected with a gentle smile. "And there's nothing to repay. Get some rest, Bethany." After he left, Bethany washed her face and hands, the cool water refreshing against her skin. She removed only her boots before slipping under the quilt, too tired to undress further. The bed felt like heaven after days of discomfort, and within moments, she was asleep. She woke to sunlight streaming through curtained windows and the smell of coffee. For a moment, disorientation gripped her, but then the events of the previous night came flooding back. Embarrassment heated her cheeks as she recalled how desperate she must have appeared. After splashing water on her face and attempting to tame her tangled hair, Bethany ventured into the main room. Jacob stood at the stove, frying bacon. He turned at her entrance, his face breaking into a smile. "Good morning. Thought you might sleep till noon, the state you were in. How are you feeling?" "Much improved, thank you," Bethany replied, smoothing her rumpled dress self-consciously. "I apologize for my appearance last night." "Nothing to apologize for," Jacob said, placing a plate of eggs and bacon on the table. "Sit and eat. Coffee's hot." Over breakfast, Jacob explained that he owned a modest cattle ranch outside town. "It's not the biggest spread, but it's mine, free and clear. Been building it up these past 8 years. You live here alone?" Bethany asked, then blushed at the forwardness of her question. Jacob didn't seem to mind. "Just me and the occasional ranch hand during busy seasons. My parents passed 5 years back, influenza. Sister married and moved to Pueblo." After breakfast, Jacob offered to take Bethany into town to speak with Mrs. Miller about the store position. "You can stay in my sister's room until you get settled," he said. "I'm often out with the herd anyway." "I couldn't possibly," Bethany began. "It's settled," Jacob interrupted firmly. "At least until you find your footing." Mrs. Miller, a plump woman with kind eyes, hired Bethany on the spot. "Been needing help for months," she explained. "My arthritis makes stocking the high shelves near impossible. Can you start tomorrow?" The job didn't pay much, but it included meals, and Mrs. Miller promised to spread the word about Bethany's teaching experience. School board's been searching for someone. Current teachers moving to Denver come spring. Over the next few weeks, Bethany settled into a routine. She worked at the store during the day, took her meals with Mrs. Miller, and returned to Jacob's house in the evenings. Despite her initial discomfort at the arrangement, Jacob's respectful behavior soon put her at ease. He never entered her room, always knocked before entering common areas if her door was closed, and treated her with unfailing courtesy. They developed a comfortable companionship, sharing meals when his ranch work allowed. Talking about books, Jacob had a surprising collection inherited from his mother, and exchanging stories of their lives. Bethany learned that Jacob had fought briefly in the final year of the Civil War, though he spoke little of it. He discovered her talent for drawing, admiring the sketches she made of the town and surrounding landscape. One evening in late January, as they sat by the fire after supper, Jacob asked about the locket she always wore. "It's my parents'," Bethany explained, opening it to show him the tiny photographs inside. "They died in a riverboat accident when I was 16. I went to live with my aunt afterward, but she passed 2 years later. I've been on my own since." "You've had more than your share of hardship," Jacob observed softly. "As have you," she replied. Their eyes met across the small space between their chairs, and something shifted in the air between them. Bethany looked away first, her heart beating unexpectedly fast. February brought heavy snow that kept Bethany at the store for 3 nights, sleeping on a cot in the back room rather than attempting the walk to Jacob's house. When the weather cleared, she found him waiting outside the store, concern evident on his face. "I was worried," he admitted as they walked home together. "Storm came on faster than expected." "Mrs. Miller took good care of me," Bethany assured him. "Though I missed your coffee. Hers is weak as water." Jacob laughed, the sound warming her more than her heavy shawl. "High praise indeed for my humble brewing skills." That night, they sat closer than usual by the fire, and when Jacob's hand accidentally brushed hers as he passed her a cup of tea, neither of them pulled away immediately. The contact, brief as it was, left Bethany's skin tingling. In March, Bethany received word that the school board wanted to meet with her about the teaching position. The current teacher, Mrs. Henderson, was leaving earlier than expected due to her husband's new job. "They want me to start after Easter," Bethany told Jacob excitedly over dinner. "The pay is better than the store, and there's a small house that comes with the position." Jacob's smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "That's wonderful news. You'll make an excellent teacher." Bethany felt a strange disappointment at his response. Part of her had hoped he might suggest, but no, that was foolish. Their arrangement had always been temporary. The following Sunday, Jacob invited Bethany to ride out to his ranch. "Thought you might like to see it," he explained, somewhat awkwardly. "Weather's fine, and Sunday's your day off." The ranch was about 3 miles outside town, a modest spread with a barn, corral, and small herd of cattle grazing on the hillside. The ranch house was still under construction, larger than his town house, but still cozy in scale. "I've been building it room by room as I can afford it," Jacob explained as he showed her around. "Started with just the kitchen and 1 bedroom, added the parlor last year." "It's lovely," Bethany said sincerely, admiring the craftsmanship of the wooden beams and the stone fireplace. They ate a picnic lunch on a blanket near a small stream that ran through the property. The spring sun was warm, and wildflowers dotted the grass around them. Bethany found herself relaxing, laughing more easily than she had in years. As they packed up to return to town, Jacob suddenly turned to her, his expression serious. "Bethany, there's something I need to say." Her heart quickened. "Yes. These past months, having you in my home, I've come to." He paused, seeming to struggle for words. "I've grown fond of your company." "As I have yours," Bethany replied softly. "The thing is," Jacob continued, his voice gaining confidence, "I find myself dreading the day you'll move to the teacher's house. And I wondered if perhaps—" He took a deep breath. "Would you consider staying? Not as my guest, but as my wife." Bethany's breath caught. Of all the things she'd imagined he might say, this was both the most hoped for and the most unexpected. "Jacob, you don't need to answer now," he added quickly. "I know it's sudden and perhaps unwelcome, but I find myself thinking of you constantly, worrying when you're not near, happier than I've been in years when you are." He met her eyes directly. "I believe I'm falling in love with you, Bethany Lawrence." Tears sprang to Bethany's eyes, surprising them both. "No one has cared for me that way since my parents died," she whispered. Jacob stepped closer, tentatively taking her hands in his. "I would care for you every day, if you'd let me." Instead of answering with words, Bethany rose on her tiptoes and pressed her lips gently to his. The kiss was brief, but conveyed more than she could have expressed aloud. When she pulled back, Jacob's smile was radiant. "Is that a yes?" he asked, his voice husky. "It's a yes," Bethany confirmed, laughing as he picked her up and spun her around. They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Cedar Ridge. Mrs. Miller hosted a modest reception at the store, and the whole town turned out to celebrate. Jacob's sister Elizabeth came from Pueblo with her husband and children, embracing Bethany warmly and whispering, "He's never looked so happy." Bethany took the teaching position as planned, but rather than moving into the teacher's house, she rode to and from the school each day on a gentle mare Jacob gave her as a wedding gift. The school board agreed to rent the teacher's house to a young doctor who had recently arrived in town, solving 2 community needs at once. Spring turned to summer, and Bethany found herself settling into ranch life with surprising ease. She helped Jacob with the vegetable garden, learned to make cheese from the milk of their 2 cows, and spent evenings on the porch watching the sunset over the mountains, Jacob's arm around her shoulders. In July, they traveled to Denver to purchase supplies they couldn't get in Cedar Ridge. Bethany was nervous about returning to the city where she'd faced such difficulty, but with Jacob beside her, she found her fear diminishing. They stayed at a respectable hotel, visited bookshops to build up the school's library, and purchased fabric for curtains for the ranch house. On their final evening in Denver, as they walked back to their hotel after dinner, Bethany froze at the sight of a familiar figure ahead: William Bradford, her former employer, the man whose unwanted advances had driven her to flee. Jacob felt her tension immediately. "What is it?" "That man," Bethany whispered, nodding toward Bradford. "He's the one I told you about. My former employer." Jacob's expression hardened. "Stay here," he said, but Bethany caught his arm. "No, please. I don't want confrontation. Let's just go another way." Jacob hesitated, clearly torn between respecting her wishes and confronting the man who had frightened her. Finally, he nodded, guiding her across the street and down a different path to their hotel. Later, in the privacy of their room, Bethany found tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry," she said, wiping them away. "I thought I was past being afraid of him." Jacob sat beside her on the edge of the bed, taking her hands in his. "You have nothing to apologize for. But Bethany, you should know you never need to fear him or anyone else again. I would never let anyone harm you." "I know," she said, leaning against his solid presence. "It's just, seeing him brought it all back. He has no power over you now," Jacob reminded her gently. "You're Bethany Porter now, a respected teacher and my beloved wife." The truth of his words settled over her like a warm blanket. She was no longer alone, no longer the desperate young woman shaking from hunger at midnight on a stranger's doorstep. She had found not just safety but love, deeper and more sustaining than she had ever imagined possible. They returned to Cedar Ridge the following day, the ranch house welcoming them home with familiar comfort. That night, in the quiet darkness of their bedroom, Bethany told Jacob she believed she was with child. His joy was boundless, lifting her in a gentle embrace before laying his hand reverently on her still flat stomach. "A baby," he whispered, wonder in his voice. "Our baby." As fall painted the Colorado landscape in gold and crimson, Bethany's condition became known throughout the small community. The school board arranged for Mrs. Henderson's younger sister to take over her classes after Christmas, allowing Bethany to focus on preparing for the baby's arrival. Jacob worked tirelessly, completing 2 more rooms in the ranch house, a nursery adjacent to their bedroom, and a small study where Bethany could continue tutoring children who needed extra help. He built a rocking chair for the nursery, carving designs of wildflowers along the arms, reminiscent of the meadow where he'd proposed. Winter came early that year, blanketing the ranch in snow by mid-November. Bethany, now showing visibly beneath her dresses, found herself nesting, arranging and rearranging the nursery, knitting tiny garments, and reading aloud from her favorite books, convinced the baby could hear and would be born loving stories. On Christmas Eve, a blizzard raged outside, but inside their home, warmth and contentment reigned. They exchanged simple gifts: a new pen set for Bethany, a leather-bound journal for Jacob, and shared memories of Christmases past with their parents. "Next year will be different," Jacob said, his hand resting on Bethany's rounded belly. "Next year there will be 3 of us." February brought milder weather and increased anticipation as Bethany's time grew near. Dr. Collins, the young physician who had taken the teacher's house, visited regularly to check on her progress, assuring them both that everything appeared normal. On a clear night in early March, almost exactly a year after Jacob had proposed by the stream, Bethany went into labor. The hours that followed were a blur of pain and determination, with Jacob refusing to leave her side despite Dr. Collins's suggestions that he wait elsewhere, as was customary. "My place is with my wife," Jacob insisted, holding Bethany's hand through each contraction, wiping her brow, and murmuring encouragement. Just as dawn broke over the mountains, their daughter entered the world with a robust cry that brought tears to both parents' eyes. They named her Emma Rose Porter, after both their mothers. As Dr. Collins packed his bag to leave, having pronounced both mother and child healthy, he paused at the bedroom door. "You know, in all my training, I've never seen a father stay through the birth. Most men can't stomach it." Jacob, cradling his newborn daughter while Bethany rested, looked up with a smile. Most men haven't seen the woman they love shaking from hunger at midnight and vowed never to let her suffer again. When the doctor had gone, Bethany reached for Jacob's hand. Is that true? Did you make such a vow that first night? Jacob nodded, sitting carefully on the edge of the bed. The moment I saw you on my doorstep, something told me you were going to change my life. I just didn't know how completely or how wonderfully. Bethany smiled, stroking her daughter's downy head. From hunger to this abundance, she marveled. Who could have imagined such a journey? I think perhaps it was always meant to be, Jacob replied, leaning down to kiss her gently. You finding your way to my door that cold midnight was the beginning of everything good in my life. As spring returned to the Colorado Territory, flowers bloomed along the stream where Jacob had proposed, and new calves joined the growing herd. The ranch prospered, and in the evenings, Bethany would sit on the porch with Emma in her arms, watching Jacob finish his day's work, feeling a contentment she had once thought impossible. Sometimes, when Emma was asleep and the night was still, they would recall that first midnight meeting, she trembling from hunger, he offering simply, "Come eat at my table." How those simple words had changed everything, opening the door to a love that had grown from kindness into the foundation of their lives. And on quiet nights, Jacob would sometimes whisper against Bethany's hair, "Are you happy, Mrs. Porter?" And Bethany, thinking of the desperate young woman she had been and the loved woman she had become, would always answer the same way, "More than I ever dreamed possible." For from the darkness of that midnight encounter had come the brightest light of their lives, a love as vast as the Colorado sky and as enduring as the mountains that surrounded their home.